is a substantial medical risk, it can be okay, because the law uses a risk benefit. And EPA must register pesticides as they can okay. Basically, register means you register and you can use it, even if they do not pose unreasonable risk to man and the environment. And here's the catch to it: taking into account the economic, social, and environmental costs and benefits for the use of any pesticide. So they're looking at economic, and the lobbyists and the lawyers for Dow Chemical, DuPont, and the Chemical Manufacturers Association of America have tremendous influence on this. So they can allow substantial medical risks to be ignored if it's a, quote, economic benefit. And again, what they're saying is that our primary concern is not medical. When you deal with vulnerable populations, that's very, very concerning to me.
Yes, in the
My question about the economic benefit. Is it possible that the EPA looks at economic benefit because their existence is based on our Constitution?
well, this it's really interesting because, as you know, laws are established and then they're changed over the years. So there are actually two laws that affect pesticides. And the laws that affect residues in our food is now called a health-based standard. It's not technically a risk-benefit standard. And the thing that makes this difficult is that EPA regulates under what's called a risk assessment. So when they say, oh, we're protecting you against cancer, neurological disease, reproductive effects, whatever it may be, they're protecting based on risk assumptions, which go to averages, average body weight, average diet, as I said earlier, your pre-existing conditions. And so it gets to be, the assumptions that are brought to that risk assessment, when you look at them and you look at them in terms of your own family or yourself or your background health problems, really don't add up. So we're dealing with, for all intents and purposes right now, a health-based standard that's based on risk calculations that don't really reflect reality. And more importantly, they don't reflect the kinds of information you would want to know to make a fair and full decision. The simplest way of thinking about this is, do you eat only if you're eating a conventional chemical-intensive diet, do you, from food grown with chemicals, pesticides, etc., are you just eating one chemical a day? No, we're eating mixtures of chemicals, and we're not just exposed through our food, we're exposed through our air and through our water. And so that's why these ordinances are so important, because you're starting to say, do we really need these chemicals in our diet? But the bottom line is, if you're going to talk to an elected official or regulator in town, we have to start talking about the standards that are used to regulate these chemicals. And the health-based standard that people often refer to is really a risk assessment-based standard. So you begin, and it doesn't take very long, you begin to familiarize yourself with what does that really mean for me and my children, my grandchildren? What does that mean, this risk-based standard? And again, I go back to this concept of community values. Is this something that the community accepts? And is it needed, given the availability of alternatives?
This gentleman in the blue shirt.
I also want to thank you for this presentation. I look at this, I think there are perhaps three groups involved. One, us who are perhaps in favor of active regulation. A second group which sees it not in its interest for a variety of reasons to be regulated and perhaps like to do away with it all entirely. And then a third group which is not engaged. They're not hearing you. How have you dealt, and I think particularly with the South Portland and the Casco Bay, how did you deal with particularly those who are opposed to the regulation? And also, how did you engage those who weren't really listening or you didn't think were paying attention? Thank you.
So, in terms of crafting our ordinance, like I said, we tried to meet with as many people as possible, and we had a lot of negative comments or concerns about each draft we put out, and all of that feedback helped make it stronger. There was a lot of people that just simply said, we don't want this, it's not in our best interest, or we need to stick with integrated pest management. And, I think having the directive from our city council helped us have the cover to say, well, we're going to go beyond that, and this is what it's going to look like, but we're interested in doing it in a way that makes sense for people. So I am not sure about so far engaging, we're just started on our journey for outreach and education, and I think that there are going to be, of course, with every law you pass, a handful of people that say, no, I'm not going to do this, people are saying, well, what about the people that are going to spray at midnight? And I'm like, well, then why do they have to wait that long and stay up that late? Because I'm not going to be at everyone's house. So that's not our primary target. Our primary target is to talk with people that are willing or a little bit reticent and say, you can have a great landscape. In fact, we're talking about human health, we're talking about water quality, but we haven't talked about soil health and landscape health. And so what we're aiming to do is build up the biodiversity in our ecosystem, and not simply get on the pesticide treadmill. And so I think the first group we're targeting are the people that are willing, and then we'll probably reach out and say, see, we've had a lot of success, and so we'll move on to maybe the people that are reticent. And then I'm not sure, we expect to tweak our ordinance as we need to in the next few years to get people on board. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we had much more support than we had people against it.
What we're trying to do is to create peer pressure by giving out these yard signs that people put in their yard, and they'll go, well, how come they got a sign and we didn't? We do try to do a lot of outreach and education through neighborhood socials, and we're also finding people within like the landscaping community who either are converted or have always done this. We happen to be on the campus of Southern Maine Community College, which has a landscaping major, and they are now touting themselves as ecological landscapers. So we're hoping that through that peer pressure that will increase, but there will always be people who aren't interested. We've found two groups so far of landscapers: the people who have come and actually participated in workshops with South Portland and Portland, and they say, well, we do the right thing, so don't regulate us. And we say, you probably do, but all these kids who are going out in spring, according to the schedule of ChemLawn, these are the ones that you need an ordinance for, because they're not part of the tent, literally. And so after 18 years of just doing education, we say that ordinances are the way to go. So it's a little of both.
Maybe I can just add one point that we found out when we were having our public hearings. We did have interested landscapers, pesticide control companies, even residents who normally are very supportive of everything we do. And when you say they just didn't want anything, or they were concerned about coverage, in talking to them, it was usually for one specific reason. And we were able to, with some of the lawn care people, find out what the problem was, for example, on our regulation of not using any neonicotinoid. And through conversations and working with them, we were able to work out a structure that would not harm wind-pollinated plants. I'm sorry, would not harm bee-pollinated plants, but could be used specifically by stem injection on wind-pollinated plants. So many times we found when people were kind of against the regulation, in talking to them, there was a reason. And in some cases, we were able to make some changes that we didn't feel would harm the ordinance per se, but still allowed them to feel that they could comply.
Just one quick thing. What I've noticed is that, you know, this isn't always about convincing the masses of people. This is finding influencers or people that are influential in town, starting with the local groups that Marie, showed us, which is, Protect South Portland, for instance, brought together leaders in town that had the respect of the community, having worked on other environmental issues in the community, and then that group had worked with the city council on previous issues. So these people became trusted in town and became a voice for people. So finding that influential voice in town is really, really helpful. In Ogunquit, when Scott Eldridge, who owns the local hardware store, Eldridge Lumber and Hardware, stood up at a community meeting and said, I can function as a businessman without neonicotinoids on my shelf. I don't want to sell products that hurt bees. There are other ways to manage landscapes and turf, and then has gone leaps and bounds beyond that and is offering organic compatible products now. And see his ad in the MOFGA agenda here. They're really doing amazing work. They're a model, but also at the time, a real leader in the community to say to the community, we can do this as a community, and I can, he's making money too. He's a businessman, and he's done two good things. He's made money for his business, and he's committed to a social value in protecting the environment. So when those two things come together, it's a beautiful thing, and that's what happened.
I'm just wondering if we might be able to make some connections here among the people. I'm about to move to North Yarmouth. I'm wondering if anyone else is interested in working on this in town. If there's some... Oh, great. Okay, so let's talk. But I wonder if there's also like a resource maybe on the web, people who can say, yeah, I want to work on this. I'm just looking for other allies. And I'm wondering what you could say about that.
I don't have a great answer about North Yarmouth. I know there's an effort afoot in Yarmouth, so nearby community. But I think taking to the web, we'd be happy to, like, if you are interested in contacting me or contacting Portland Protectors, we could share your information on our Facebook or with our contacts, to see if there's anyone, because we do have people in our network who are outside of Portland who are just interested in this issue. So I would imagine there probably are people in North Yarmouth. It's just a matter of, finding them.
And two groups that are now very active in North Yarmouth, the Royal River Trust, and there's another Royal River Association, and I can give you their email contacts. They're working on issues like dam removal and other things, but they've already got a cluster of people. Like Jay was saying, you find those decision makers or those local advocates. So we'd love to chat.
I just wanted to add that contact information for all of the panelists here is in one of the handouts on the table over there, but it's also in the FAIR directory of participants, and it's also on the website, so you can get in touch with anyone through that. Jody.
I haven't talked with Leora Rabin lately, but she does live in Yarmouth, and she's a physician, a psychiatrist actually, who has a connection with PSR. And I will provide that information to you if you come to me and ask for it. I was reminded by several things that people have said about landscapers.
I don't think I can hear you.
The Pesticide Control Board has been arranging with Melna to have presentations at places where garden supplies are sold. Also, the recent NOFA training should result in quite a number of new people certified organically, and we will be hearing more about OPM, organic pest management, as opposed to IPM, which is really a discredited term. For the South Portland effort, I do congratulate you. I've read the ordinance. I may not have seen the most recent draft, but it's very thoughtfully done. And I'm hoping that if exemptions are granted for so-called emergency situations, you will have a record. I think I remember reading that you would actually record the physical location of those sprayings, so that people would be able to find out exactly where in South Portland pesticide spraying is done. Is that right? Is that the expectation?
Well, yeah. Yes, I mean, I think we'll keep records. I think what we put on the website isn't going to be address specific. People were very concerned that we would put a big, huge target on somebody's property and that there would be some public shaming, and that's not what we're interested in. We are interested in right to know, so we will have all of that information, and we'll put it down per tax map. So it'll be in aggregate, but you know, if you're moving into the neighborhood and you want to see, are there a lot of issues with this in this neighborhood, you'll be able to see, and there'll be the information there. And we will be collecting data internally about, you know, how we need to make tweaks to the ordinance, and if we do. So trust me, we're trying to get as much data as possible, yes.
I've looked at the reports that are submitted to the Pesticide Control Board, the ones that I can get from the largest landscapers. The problem is that there's no way of knowing where that spraying was done. I mean, you can guess for certain of them that they live and work in the greater Portland area, but that's why it's important that the ordinance have that provision. Roundup Ready grass, does anybody know when that's likely to hit the market? That's one of the biggest threats, because we've heard about it for years, and it is likely to appear at some point.
Just a quick question, wondering whether any localities have made ordinance changes through citizens' initiative as opposed to, you know, Portland, South Portland, where you don't have the support of the local government. Has anyone done it directly by?
Ogunquit.
That's how.
What's a valid initiative?
It's really, Julie can speak to the issue of notifying the Board of Pesticide Control in advance of the vote, or do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Just that there is a regulation that you need to notify them beforehand. So Ogunquit had some significant problems because they didn't do that step, and had to go through several more steps to get their ordinance then redone in a legal way. So we treated it as a very big deal. It's not a big deal. Our city clerk sent the director of the Board of Pesticides an email all along the way. Great, we're having another workshop. We're on draft 3. This is what we're doing. Okay, we're having a first reading. We're having a second reading. It got passed. So it's not for them to review it. It's for them to know what's going on and to be able to register it.
Maybe I could just add to that a bit. We were well aware of what had happened in Ogunquit regarding that. So we did take precautions, knowing that they did have to be notified. And there's a set rule of thumb of time and how they're notified. And again, they want to be notified once the ordinance is passed. And if you don't, I think the reason is they also have to update the state records 7 days in advance, right? But it's not hard, and the town clerk will do it.
It's not hard. It's just a formality, but it's very serious. If you've gone through a town meeting, passed an ordinance, and then forget to do that, because that's happened quite a few times. It's not just Ogunquit. It's 7 days prior that you have to notify them, and then within 30 days afterward. And that's actually a state statute, which is something that you want to be very familiar with. There's also the so-called right to farm law in Maine, which could have a bearing on, and it did actually nullify Montville's ordinance some years ago, a GMO ordinance, where you have to notify not 90 days in advance the Commissioner of Agriculture to give them a chance to look at the ordinance in the event that it's going to conflict with agriculture, and they can actually judge on whether that it's the case or not based on whether the farm is meeting best management practices. They may actually be exempt. So I think that's one of the reasons why exemption for agriculture has been added to South Portland and to Ogunquit. That takes care of that. You don't have to do it. But if you don't include that in your ordinance, then you have to be very careful about the right to farm law as well.
One other quick point. We heard last year in December that the state was considering bringing something to the legislature not to allow the towns to make this decision. We got in touch with our representative and learned that they weren't going to do it during this session. Not that it's off the table, but what we chose to do at that time found out some of the things that they were going to ask towns to have to do in the event they passed their own, and we were sure we kind of took those all into consideration and wrote them into the ordinance ahead of time. Not that we've covered everything, but we made sure we had a waiver process and ability to hear waivers as part of our ordinance.
That ill-conceived bill may come back to the legislature, so it's important for everybody to kind of keep an ear out. And I think one of the reasons why it didn't make it through the legislature was because they got so much kickback from outside, from all kinds of organizations and individuals, and it was going to be impossible for them to get that through. But it could come back again, actually. Yes.
Thank you so much. This was so helpful. I think it was about 6 years ago that Paul Tukey was here and showed his documentary, A Chemical Reaction, and that was so fabulous, and it lit a fire for me. I'm from New Hampshire. I'm a health practitioner there. I teach about this all the time with my clients. This spring, I fought a rail trail organization that wants to spray herbicides, pesticides on the rail trail. And I went to their meeting, did a presentation. There was a doctor on the board arguing with me that there's no science. I continued to go to the meetings. I'm kind of laughed out of every meeting. And I will be contacting every one of you for support and good advice about getting kind of a team. And Jen at Beyond Pesticides was also very helpful for me, and your website's fantastic. So I'm going to keep fighting. But I do have a question based on a chemical reaction. In Canada, there was some laws passed about the selling of chemicals in the stores. Like Home Depot had to pull certain products off their shelves. So I'm curious about, especially in South Portland, if there was a contingency about that.
We had a lot of discussions about that, and we decided to make our pesticide ordinance a use ordinance, not having anything to do with sales, because we do have exemptions and waivers for now.
Right.
And also because people could easily go to the next town over. I think at the state level it would be a different issue. Personally, I'd like to see, it's written into our ordinance that we'll work with retailers to provide them education and training, and for staff education and training, but I'd love to see at least pesticides treated like cold medicine and kept behind the counter, or some way that you can interact with it. I know at some point they locked up all their spray paint, and that people had to ask to buy spray paint because it was becoming a nuisance issue. So we did did not write it into our ordinance, but I'm hoping that we can address it without simply banning the sale of it.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
This will be the last question. I think we're...
Hi, I'm an organic landscaper. I've been doing it for about 30 years. And I was one of the teachers at the course in Portland for the NOFA accreditation course. So it's important that you mention its accreditation and not certification, first of all. Second of all, I heard something about neonics being, it's okay to inject them. The Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station just did a study. Linden trees will kill honeybees up to 6 years after one application. They're testing many more ornamental trees right now, and the least is 5 years. It's not published yet, but imidacloprid should not be allowed to be used, period. There are really good alternatives, organic and non. Number one. Number two, I want to offer any help that NOFA can give to you. We've done a lot of this footwork already. So there's an organization called Environment and Human Health. It's Yale-based. Yale has helped us a lot with our science. The NOFA Organic Land Care Committee has used NOFA and Cornell extensively. So there's a woman, incredible woman, in charge of EHH, which is Environment and Human Health, Nancy Alderman, who has done a lot of this footwork, getting things going in towns and trying to get up to, we lobby in Hartford a lot, and we're really close. The third thing I wanted to say is the GMO grass seed is right now stopped. However, Monsanto is merging with Bayer because Monsanto's name is so bad. Once Bayer gets a hold of it, it's going to be a huge cash crop. The problem with the GMO grass is that it's a graminoid. Grasses are in a group of plants that the same as wheat. So once that pollen gets in the air, we can kiss organic wheat goodbye. So I mean, it's really, really important. If anything, we could stop that from coming. Thank you.
I think we're all set, and thanks to everyone in attendance and all the presenters. Oh, yes, and please take a look at the front table. There are many handouts and lots of interesting materials that I'm sure you'll be interested in.